So I'm very happy to welcome you to our panel, Can a Video Game Make You Cry? Obviously, we all know by now that it can. There are endless streams of YouTubers crying while playing certain games. There are compilations of those YouTubers crying. There are even hit lists of those compilations of YouTubers crying. The question, can a video game make you cry, was first asked in 1982 by Electronic Arts, which seems a little odd from today's perspective. But not so long ago, the question was still meant seriously by many game developers and critics. Crying was, in terms of video games, an achievement still waiting to be unlocked. Many games claimed that video games were neither capable of expressing nor transmitting deep emotions. When we ask, can a video game make you cry, we want to investigate what this idea of deeper emotions means for the evolution of video games. Why has there been such a rise of games lately which try to convey experience around emotions like loneliness or grief? How do these video games represent emotions in story and gameplay? And so I'm very happy to introduce our four guests. They are all part of this ongoing discussion about emotions in video games, either through the games they created or through research. So the first one I want to introduce is Cornelia Geppert, which I assume many of you know. Cornelia is the co-founder, author, art and creative director of the German-based company Yomei. She released Sea of Solitude this year, a mental health game based on her experience of an abusive emotional relationship. The game was controversially discussed in regard to the use of empathy as a design goal and the depiction of mental health issues in recent games. Please round of applause for Cornelia. Johan Fanisse is an award-winning industry veteran based in France. Welcome. He started his career as a developer at Ubisoft, where he worked on titles like Beyond Good and Evil. Today he is known as the founder of the indie studio EGX, and especially for his contributions to the memory of World War I with critically acclaimed titles like Valiant Hearts and 1111 Memories Retold, which both focus heavily on emotional storytelling. Jon is also a vocal part of the Games for Change movement. Please run a round of applause for him. Dr. Sabine Hara is a leading games researcher and game designer based in Finland. They wrote the very insightful book, Games and Bereavement, which takes a close look at how video games in the past have been dealing with attachment, loss, and grief. Sabine has developed her own concept of grief-based game design, based on personal experience, claiming that gaming culture needs more diversity. One round of applause for... And last, welcome you, Benjamin Sonnenschein, who is the creative director and narrative designer of the indie game Upside Down, which you could play here at EGX in the indie booth. It's really interesting. His team won the GDD Award for Young Talent this year. The game Upside Down is about the journey of a young girl through a mystical swamp in search of her mother. Welcome to you all. My name is Giacomo Maihofer. I'm a cultural journalist working for the independent magazine Gain. So to start off the discussion, I would like to show a short video clip. You will hear a very famous game designer speaking, Kelly Santiago from That Game Company. 10 years ago, she described the process of change in how games are handling emotions. Oh, first I'm coming myself. No. The technique is not working. I'm so sorry. Oh, yeah. There it is.
Our initial films began as very heavy-handed, focusing on very simplistic emotions such as excitement or fear. Sounds pretty similar. Kind of games we played when we were children just don't work for us anymore. Now we have a generation of gamers who are grown-ups themselves and are starting to wonder if there isn't something more to games. Could our games be more serious? Could they reach higher levels of joy, to ecstasy? Could they reach deeper levels of sadness? Is this real? Oh my God! Get off me!
The first time you see someone die, everything shuts down. You're left with thoughts that go round and round. Every man has his demons.
So, my first question goes to you, Johan. In the video at the beginning, Kelly Santiago basically says that video games over the years have become more mature in how they handle emotions. Do you agree with this view? And what were your experiences when you started 20 years as a game designer?
Yes, I agree, but I don't think there's only one reason for that. So she says basically that it's because we developer get older, and that's true. But I think that's not the only reason. There are many different reasons why we would do this kind of game, and I would say for just my personal experience, it was not to make something sad. It was just to talk about something, and it happens to be something sad, but it's not. Sadness was not the goal. It was a tool to open your heart, to make you think about something, but it's not a goal in itself. So we never said, "Oh, we're gonna make a very sad game." No, it's not the goal. It was just, let's talk about war a different way, the real way, the way human experience war. But it was not. It happens that war is sad, but it's not the goal. So emotion, I think emotion is not a goal. It's a tool, and it's a tool to express something. So if you do a game only to make people laugh or cry, laugh maybe it works. I don't know. I did the rabbits, raving rabbits. It was just for laughing. This one was just for laughing. but the sadness was not to be sad. I think if you don't have a proper subject, a meaning, if it's not meaningful, it could not be sad, or if it would be weird. And it's funny because I worked with Kelly Santiago after that. She was at Google after Journey, and we worked together because she was handling all the games at Google Play. And now she's not anymore at Google. But we worked together on another game after that. So it was nice because she knows exactly what it takes to make this kind of games. And she was pushing Google to do this kind of game. So that was good to have her on at Google. That was nice. On mobile, it's even more difficult to imagine this kind of game on mobile. But yeah, that was very interesting. So I think there's many reasons why it became more emotional in the space of games, and each of us, I think, have a different reason why it became sad in a way. But yes, and I have when I saw the panel, like can a video game make you cry? Someone in the team said, is it for who? For the developer or for the player? Because and I was like, I think it's for the player, but I think we also cry as developer. You know that if you're a developer, you know what I'm talking about. It's very hard to make a game, so yeah, that's.
I found that very interesting. Thank you. But I think there has been such a strong discourse in the public about video games. Like you would read this headline every now and then when Beyond Two Souls came out, or now the new God of War, when they always would say, well, these games would open up gaming to new emotions and they would make it about the emotions themselves. And I think there is a strong, I totally agree with you, but I think in the public there's a strong discourse around emotions as a sake for themselves because people perceived games as lacking emotions. Also, Kelly Santiago and a lot of others people always have pushed in this direction, and I find it very interesting that you say that it's not about that. So, but looking on today, I would like ask you, Benjamin, because you're starting your first um, commercial game, which already focuses on emotional topics. So, starting today as a game designer, how do you perceive this change, or do you even think about it, or is it natural for you today?
Um, I personally think that most of uh, most of the work that I for myself, if I'm doing, so originally I'm coming from theater, and either if I'm working on a theater play or if I'm doing a light installation or anything else, I think you can tell a story and everything, and by that also you can perceive emotions and evoke the the media in itself. So of course, when I look at older games, um, I'm also looking at many things they had to fight for. So the the media game is really still fighting for being taken seriously, and that's also a lot coming with this question. So for me, it's more of a natural thing to put as much emotion from myself into it as I can, and yeah, by that I think it's the best way to achieve emotions for players. So it's more of a natural thing for me as a young developer.
Yes, thank you. Sabine, you wrote a book about how games have used emotions like attachment and loss to foster grief experience. Um, what was your reason to start this? And also, when did you first see games which use these techniques in a meaningful way?
Yeah, so there's obviously a personal story behind that also, behind that research. So I went to a quite traumatic death in my family. I lost my son when he was 3 weeks old, when I was 19 years old. And ever since, I actually looked into the media, that landscape that I really liked. I come from a gaming family, so games was also one of the media that I kind of tried to use to deal with kind of traumatic experience like this. And I couldn't find any stories about any kind of trauma or traumatic feelings that I had or that I had to go through. And I felt this is kind of interesting because death is everywhere in video games. When you look at the early arcade games, for instance, death is basically a feature. It's a feature of failure, and it's a feature of actually it's an encouragement to continue gaming and to continue playing and put another coin into the machine, right? So I found this very interesting that death is everywhere, but grief and loss and these kind of feelings are not really represented. So I felt like this is an interesting thing to put my research effort into, also for the sake of maybe changing the landscape in the future. And what I found is there's a couple of games that kind of stand out in terms of already dealing with such issues on a maybe a more symbolical level. So if you remember Final Fantasy VII, for instance, I know how many of you have played Final Fantasy VII. It's like a very old game
Some people.
from the 90s. There is like a very kind of like traumatic death in there that you could just also feel on a very mechanical level of just creating a character and leveling up a character, and then you lose that character, and it's really, really traumatizing. Then there's a game called Shelter. Has anyone played Shelter? Cool. So you know what I'm talking about. Shelter is a game about a badger parent. It's not really gendered, but it's an assumption that it's a mom. A badger parent trying to get their kids from one burrow to the next, and it's nature. So nature is super dangerous, and you have to kind of survive there. And it's a permadeath game. And if something goes wrong with your timing, your kids die, and they never come back. So that is like super. That has actually motivated a lot of players to reach out to forums in terms of almost like a self-help thing, and just like describe their own experiences in like how they tried to care for their children and failed, and this enormous guilt that comes up. So that's kind of like an example that I found really interesting in terms of deep emotions and grief as well, because every gameplay session is unique in Shelter, right? Because of the permadeath mechanic. And I talked a little bit about that. But there was I also found a lot of limitations. For instance, there's this game called Passage. I don't know how many have heard of that game. It's like an art game that has been celebrated in like 2009, I think. It's a very it's a narrative that. Very simple narrative. It's a life in 5 minutes. So what you do is you walk a character around, you find a wife, and then you walk with that wife, and then suddenly she dies. Oh, spoilers, sorry. So it's 5 minutes long. And people, especially journalists, have really, really praised that game for its depth, right? And I found it interesting because basically the woman gets thrown under the bus, and you can, because first you meet her and she stands around in a corner, then you can pick her up and then she dies. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting who this grief experience kind of caters to. So even though the game is really deep on an emotional level, it's also a particular kind of grief that is represented. Same actually for that Dragon Cancer, where it's from the perspective of the dad, even though the mom actually did a lot of caring work and hospital management and stuff for the dead child that is represented in that game. So my question was also like, how could we make that a bit more expansive? Like, whose grief are we talking about, and whose death and whose experiences are we talking about? Because we're all very different people and we have like different life stories and struggles. So that was really fascinating for me. That was also the reason why I invited 4 women to make a game about their pregnancy loss with me. So that's also described in a book, and it was actually a really fun project to work on, because it was just very experimental, and it was really validating for everyone to kind of get their narratives in there.
Cornelia, you did something similarly with Sea of Solitude, I would think. You would also go from your personal experience and experiences of close people of you,
Yes.
and work them into the game. And I think before Sea of Solitude, I don't really remember a game which engaged with the topic of emotional abuse in that way. Was this also something that you thought you had to make? And where did you find the inspiration for doing it?
I would love to talk a little bit beforehand about the games industry itself. For me, it's still the games industry is still kind of young. The games industry starts to grow up. So when the first games had been made back in the days, the game developers itself had been young. The games industry or all the games had been considered more for children or teenagers. Nobody even considered games back in the days, like 80s or 90s, for older people or adults even or something. God of War, which I always love to mention with Cory Barlog, is like the perfect example. Like the first God of War games had been like more about like the action and some big monsters and stuff. And Cory now started to get older. He started to get a father. And of course, the main topic in your life is being fatherhood, and you're a game developer, it comes naturally that you start to think about putting that into your game. And it was the same with me when I was younger. I never even thought about like putting deep heavy emotions in my game. Like all the first games of Yomai had been commercial, free-to-play games. We tried to make money and put heart into it, but I never thought like about that really deep. So in the last years, an incredible transition in my eyes started with the games industry. Like people became more and more adult, having this private, heavy emotional topics like I said, fatherhood or grief, loss. And so we all, as game developers, started to feel like, okay, it's time that we put that into games. It's the same like I always mention with the game, with the movie industry. The first movies that had been made had been purely about fun, like Charlie Chaplin, and then they grew up over the decades and started to put emotions into the game. And this is when how I started with Sea of Solitude back in 2014. I had been like at the lowest point in my life in terms of loneliness. I had been in an emotional abusive relationship, which isolated me from almost everything. I was so concentrated on this relationship that I lacked dealing with friendships in the right way, and so this is why I felt so lonely at this time, and it came naturally to me like I needed to let it out. And we are all, I consider us all artists, so we do what every like musician is doing when they had the strongest feeling. They try to put it into their art, and this is what I did. I started in 2014 when I felt like I can't take it anymore. I can't take this feeling of isolation and loneliness anymore, even though I had been in a relationship and I had friends. So I wrote it down. I started to write the first line of Sea of Solitude. And yeah, I could talk for hours about it, so I try to keep it. But this is like how Sea of Solitude started. It came naturally because I grew up. I'm an adult, I'm an artist, and this is how I express myself through my art. So yeah.
You once said that it is still very hard to find game mechanics to convey subtle emotions in Sea of Solitude. And this is also what I would ask you, Johan, because in 1111 you tried to tackle World War One from the perspective of different kind of emotional themes: love, friendship, family, also through the choice system that there can be a regrettable outcome. And I would like just to know how you use game mechanics if you have a certain emotion that you want to tell something about meaningfully in the game, how you conceive game mechanics in your games in Sea of Solitude and 1111. Maybe first.
Should I first? And so this is like a really complicated question. So in my eyes, there are certain emotions that you can more easily express through games, like excitement or like fear. What?
Triumph.
Yeah, that's a very
Yes, triumph, exactly. But in Sea of Solitude, we wanted to transport emotions like feeling obsessive, feeling numb after the breakdown, feeling self-doubt, feeling with someone, like feeling bullied, like really bullied in a school, like really feeling it. We tried with certain emotions to really make the player feel it, but we couldn't with everything. So we tried to at least transport the idea of this emotion so people can relate to. So, for example, oh God, so many topics. There is one thing with, for example, with self-doubt. How can I start? Does anybody know how many people know the game?
That's quite a few.
2 people, great. Joking. So Sea of Solitude is about loneliness, and the main character suffers from such strong loneliness that this inner feeling turns to the outside and she becomes a monster. And so this is like the main topic. Like there are many different monsters in our game, and we try to portray different types of loneliness. But the main character we portray as ripped apart into her basic emotions. They all become different types of monsters you have to interact with. One example, Can I?
Yes.
Okay. One example is self-doubt. So self-doubt is one emotion that you constantly have to interact with throughout the game. And game mechanic wise, we thought about, okay, self-doubt is something that hinders you from actually progressing through life in a healthy way. It stands in a way from going forward. So we imagine, okay, that must be like some really big creature, and then we thought about, okay, that makes sense. Like, let's put this monster like constantly in the way and the path of the main character, and at the beginning, like really heavily insulting the main character. It was a little bit of a, oh God, can we do that? Like the first thing the first thing she does is house high. This huge creature with a shell, like everything, how we designed her, everything has a meaning. La 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 la. I don't want to go too much into detail. But like she's house high, and she comes up in the middle of a street while you're driving with a boat through flooded Berlin. And then she says, "You're worthless piece of shit," and you turn around, you can't do anything. So this is how you first approach her, and we tried to figure out how do you deal with self-doubt. So it's then in a way you need to find a way around. But at the beginning, when self-doubt is overwhelming, what you can do is kind of arguing with yourself, at least, like saying, no, 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 I'm not shitty. And then at the same time, yeah, I'm shitty. Fuck. No, it's like this confused feeling of, you know, that you're not actually completely worthless, but the main voice in your head tells you that you're worthless. And this is what we try to portray. So you have to find points in the level where you actually shed light on this self-doubt creature and have like a conversation. And throughout the game, you shrink self-doubt step by step by every like interaction you have with her. Even like I said at the beginning, that it's not really she is so overwhelmingly bad to you that you can't do anything beside like, okay, I'm shitty, I guess. But later on, when you have more and more of the conversations, she shrinks, and at some points she starts to give you actually healthy feedback. She turns from self-doubt to doubt. And this is what we try to portray with every emotion that we have in the game. She started to give healthy advice, like in the third level where you have to conquer the boyfriend and start to be obsessive about the boyfriend monster. She said, so should you look at now? Who should you take care of now, Kay? Come on, Kay is the main character. And Kay is already so obsessed and said, my boyfriend, I need to take care of my boyfriend. And Doubt says, no, Kay, come on, concentrate. So she turns smaller and smaller, and this is one important thing, just one of many things we have in the game, that she is not completely vanishing in the game. We have no emotion. A monster in our game completely vanishes. This is an important message we want to tell. Like, even like we have a self-destruction monster who tries to drown you all the time.
Don't spoil the whole game, though.
So, what was
You're telling about basically what happens through the whole game. Maybe people want to play it. So I think they got a very good indication. Johan, I wanted to ask you, you have two characters actually. So you have a buddy-based system and a choice-based system. And you also use this incredible art style. How do you work that together? Like,
but the core mechanic was the to embody those two different characters and some animals, and
some animals too. I love that.
Yeah, and there was a reason for that. So that's the goal was to express the feeling of how could I say in English, the friendship beyond knowing someone else, like the universal friendship, like you are two human beings, unconditional link.
Yes.
Because you are humans, and so during war, this is what is questioned, like why would you kill another human like you? And so this is all this big questioning that we wanted to show. So it's pretty hard to get to that point. So that's why the mechanic is pretty basic. It's just you play those two sides, one German, and one Canadian, and they get closer and closer and closer to the front. Then I don't spoil the game, but they will meet, obviously, and then you have a lot of choice. Then they separate again, they meet again. So it was the core mechanic. It's pretty simple. Almost like in not the same, but in Brothers, you show some image of Brothers.
Yeah.
Brothers is a collaborative mechanic that is very, very nice. So the idea of the game was, okay, you're gonna play them, and when they get close, then you're gonna have new mechanics because they are in the same distance, I would say, depend on the distance. But even during World War I, the cannon, they could fire from very far. So even when they are at a cannon distance, they start to have connection because they could have an impact on the other one without knowing who is the guy over there. But you as a player, you play both of them, so you really understand there was something I really wanted that was hard to achieve was the camera movement. And it was hard because of technical stuff, but I wanted the camera to move from one position to the other position. And at the beginning, I never told that. The game was during 1 year and a half was with a fixed camera position. So it was a 3D game, but with a world axis locked camera. So you always point to the opponent, like to the other side, because it has a meaning you are on this side, and then you're on the other side. But it was too complex in terms of level design, and when you play test the game, people expect to move the camera around, and it's hard to make a good level design with when you go backward, the camera stays like this. It's really, really hard to do. So we struggled too much on the camera. So there are still some levels who have this fixed point of view. When you are in a battle, you are on the camera is locked. But originally, I wanted to have it locked all the game, but it's too confusing as a player when you go backward. The camera doesn't go behind you, and so people were like, I want to move the camera. So.
Yes. What I noticed about all these games, also your game Upside Down, and a lot of mental health games, that they, in trying to portray certain emotions, they regard very heavily on symbolism, all of them. There's not one realist game which tries to tell a abusive relationship like a drama or something.
Spec Ops The Line is one example.
Spec Ops The Line, okay, one.
Yeah.
But the rest is all featured on symbolism. Like also other games like Grease, you have this world where you go through a magical inner self. You have Hellblade, which was basically hell, fighting for hell. In your game, it's a sunken city. In your game, it is realist, but it isn't because of the impressionistic style. It is all painted in impressionistic images. And I thought, why is it that in games, unlike in literature or in film, we always, most of the time, game designers resort to strong metaphorical ways and symbolism to convey psychological trauma. You want to say something?
Sure. At this point, I have to make a shout out to Doris Rouge and her work on deep game design, because she actually developed a framework to work with symbolic, actually inner symbols. Because what we are really good at as humans, both designers and players, is to come up with images that sort of like manifest our feelings or who we are at the moment.
Could you tell an example?
Yes. So, for instance, if I ask all of you I ask you the question, what does your life feel like right now? And I just asked you, come up with a landscape. Like, think of a landscape where you are right now, and who is there? What do things feel like? What do they look like? And what do you hear and what do you see? You are able to come up with something. And this is basically the first step in symbolism. You come up with a thing, an image, a sound, or something that describes what things feel like for you. And I guess this goes for all of us, that this is also a very rich starting point for making art. And in film as well, I'm just thinking David Lynch films are full of kind of dreamlike landscapes and so on. So it is a really simple starting point, and it's a really good way of symbolism is a really good way of rooting what you do in how things feel like in an authentic way for you. So you also don't have to make any concessions. You don't have to make a compromise. You have your landscape. And if you are really bold and really, let's say, really courageous, because it takes a lot of guts, you can roll with this and turn this into a game, right? Because you could you could say, okay, now I have a landscape that looks like a planet that is full of a desert with one cactus in it, and then I could ask you the question, what does the cactus do when you approach it? And then you have mechanics. So you can turn that into a game, basically.
Yeah, but I also think that what we were talking about yesterday, the human factor in games, the player really moving and interacting with this world makes symbols a lot stronger. Like when you are moving in this environment that is filled with symbols that you yourself can do, like discover and also like make your own symbols out of them. And I think that's one really important thing. But also, like when you want to create emotions in games, I think for us working on Upside Down, we want to work as subtle as possible, like not in your face emotions and discovering symbols in this world, in the story, and like seeing connections is yeah put yeah has a really good way to work like that. So
Can I briefly add something to that? Because you're bringing up a really important point about players being able to do their own symbolic work when they enter games, right? You're all capable of. The reason why you're attached to certain games or you like certain games is because you're able of projecting things on this game. This game is important to me because it reminds me of, I don't know what. Maybe a breakup or something. An example for this is a person I know who is really into playing God of War, because she feels the grappling hook mechanic really reminds her of jumping from one job to the next and being really scared to let go of the previous job, and like because Kratos is kind of hanging in the air and you don't know whether we will catch the next grappling hook. It's really evocative for her, and she likes playing that game to meditate about her life decisions, right? But this is not something that the designers probably, I'm now speculating, obviously. I mean, maybe it's a job change game, but probably not. From an intentional design level. So this kind of like players, we all kind of enter games with our own creativity and our own life stories, and we can actually make games meaningful that are just about pointing and clicking, right?
I would like somebody of you has a game like that he has attached to a certain experience in his life or a certain feeling or something like that. Who want to share this? No? Okay.
I go.
Yeah, I would love. So I'm sorry. I agree with everything you said. You all said. I just wanted to the last question add something, if there's still time.
Yes, there's still
again, like in my eyes, we see that with Sea of Solitude also. Like the games industry started. Like it's not like the movie industry where you completely consume just and look at, and it's okay to don't make the viewer all the time happy or feeling rewarded. The games industry, like a game started out by like the main thing you want to achieve in a player's emotion is like feeling triumph, feeling rewarded, having fun. So this is like the basic game, where all game mechanics lead to, and this.
I call it the fridge paradigm, because you want the game to be functional.
Yeah.
And it's like the light on the fridge turns on, and that means, woo, I have fun.
Yeah, exactly. So we already knew with the topic of loneliness, and like we talk about depression and all kinds of different topics, heavy topics, that it will be tough to get a really huge audience, because alone when gamers like look at an article and say, okay, the game is like a heavy topic, like that Dragon Cancer, for example, also like wow, then you are interested, but you may not want to play it because the main
But what about Hellblade, for example?
Hellblade is a good example because in core, it's in my eyes still also like you fight and kill and feel rewarded. But they balance it perfectly. I feel with Hellblade, like you have this moment of really intense emotion where you feel like almost like schizophrenic too, but you still have like this rewarding feeling of killing things, and then yeah, you get points for it, and that you have to have a balance, and this is what we tried with Sea of Solitude also. Like you have these heavy topics, but we wanted to put it for different reasons, but also in a fantastic adventurous setting with big monsters. So like the bigger gaming audience have something to feel like that. Oh, that could be adventurous, fun, even though there is this heavy topic. We are still, I think, not that far in the games industry that we can make a purely heavy theme topic and sell millions of copies with it. It's, I feel like a harsh truth
Yeah.
still.
So what would have to change? Because I thought about the demons. There's always demons
Yeah.
in every game.
Yeah,
Hellblade
but-
too.
There's just an interesting case, which is Limbo. How many of you know Limbo?
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So that
Oh.
says a lot. Limbo is like has sold millions, right? But it was released in 2010, and back then people complained about the quote unquote bad game design because what Limbo did is learning by dying, as you all remember. So you walk through a kind of like a patch of grass, and one of the little spikes of grass is actually not a spike of grass, but it's a spider that will impale you. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about that. You will fail, and then you have to try again and kind of try to prevent being impaled by the spider again, right? So this is a mechanic that's like against the ruling paradigm of triumph. And that's therefore people hated it. It was still like sold millions, right? But it's still selling today, and it has become the example for an art game. But back in the day, it was just not. That was just not done. There was like an emotion that was not on the radar of game developers because you were supposed to give the player a chance to master it the first time, and this game didn't do that.
One quick question to Johan, because I felt like 1111 wasn't such a huge commercial success, right? And I found it great, and I thought about all these games: Spec Ops, The Line, Limbo. Like, do you think there's like that there has to pass some time to be appreciate these games?
Yes.
Yes. And the good thing is now the big publishers, EA, Bandai, Ubisoft, they are willing to do this kind of game. So it's something that changed 5-6 years ago when it started to have 11-bit studio, This War of Mine and this kind of game, Limbo kind of. So, but maybe Limbo use the horror team, like you like to play Resident Evil or whatever, scary game. So Limbo use a bit of, okay, it's gonna be scary, oh, then there is a meaningful, there is something deeper. So maybe it's a good trick to use something more appealing. You know there's a big audience and it's gonna be fun in a way. It looks maybe fun, like Valiant Arts is a good example. Valiant Arts looks fun, the character design, the look looks like a nice comic book, but then after that you discover progressively that it's not fun and nice.
No, it's
So-
not.
I really think that fun isn't the goal for
Yeah.
for me. Fun isn't the goal, but to be entertained is the goal. So I don't have to have fun to be entertained. I can be entertained being disgusted by something. I can be entertained having fear of something, and that's what really makes the lasting emotion in me, and like guides me for the next months or so.
Do you think like fun equals rewarding feeling?
I wouldn't condense it to that, but fun is something like I love doing what I'm doing
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now. So
Yeah.
I want to push that button because I want to push that button, but because it's fun. But when I'm in
I agree.
fear, I really don't want to push that button, but I'm so entertained by that, and it has so a lasting emotion in me
Yeah.
that I really need I need to force myself, but I do it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I feel the
I
same.
also think, like, speaking of fun, fun is also different things for different people, and obviously, and I mean, what we talk usually about when we talk about fun in the games industry is a very, very narrow conception of fun, right? It's like for a particular demographic group who like to be in control of things.
How do we
Uh,
change this though? What, because we don't have so much time.
Oh.
I hear this always and ever, and how does it change?
It changes by actually, it's very simple. Breaking the games industry, not breaking into the games industry, but actually breaking the games industry to make it more diverse in terms of like who tells their stories, because then different versions of fun actually can arise, as we see in these examples with Sea of Solitude or like other really amazing creators who actually talk about their own stories uh, that have not gained any visibility before. So that's how we change fun.
And also, I think what's important is to like leave an open space for the player himself or herself, as like it's the decision. Do I want to tell one story or do I want to tell like thousands of stories? Because I create the soil for the player to create his own emotional adventure in this.
But the
So
player is not always your friend. I mean, when I look at YouTube and what is going on, what we showed here, like these games are
players are still
consumed for
human.
sadness, and there are What do you think about this? When I'm a little bit afraid that we're going into this, what you said in the beginning, emotions for their own sake, because emotions are nice and you want to have emotions when you play, but that's not always a meaningful way.
Can I add one point to this?
Yes.
Because I think like the beginning, when you talked about this kind of the history of this question, can video games make us cry? I think it's almost treated as a metric. Like
Yes.
if a video game can make you cry, it's a good video game because it has emotions in it. But actually, I think that we need a shift towards taking responsibility for our emotions and saying like, I'm a player, I have emotions. Of course, this video games makes me cry because it resonates with my current life struggle in certain ways, and it's not a design feature. It's actually, you know, it's something that we need to kind of shift a bit attention to. It's not a feature of video games that.
Yeah, like you said, and it's weird because at Ubisoft, for when I did Valiant Hearts, they didn't really believe in the project. It was a small project somewhere. We just doing the game we wanted and a small team, so they didn't care about the project. Until the moment where there was a playtest when 3 players really cried, and when the game was together and with the music and the sound, and then the marketing people were like, why do they cry? Do they have personal issue or whatever? And they ask the player, do you have a personal issue? And they say no, the game is really really sad, and they say, and then the marketing was weirdly happy. They say, oh yeah, you make them cry, it's good. And then they believe in the game, but so that's weird because it became a metric in a way.
So tears sell.
Yeah, probably.
Yes.
Just like back in the days, in 2018, when I announced Sea of Solitude at the E3 and talked about like the main topic, like loneliness, it was amazing. The players didn't even needed to play the game. Like afterwards, literally thousands of fans, I tell it all the time, wrote me like that they already cried and were like overwhelmed that somebody opened up about this emotion that they don't dare to talk about. So this alone is something that is worth like talking about more diverse emotions in games, that people feel connected and can relate. That it was amazing to see how the people reacted after S3.
But also the expectation from us as developers. I don't really need every player of Upside Down to love Upside Down. I can also want some of them to hate Upside Down, actually, because I was once doing a light installation in Frankfurt, and people were infuriated by it sometimes, and were really getting loud and like running outside, and I was like, I thought I failed, But then I was talking to the curator of the place, and she was really proud, and she said you had a success because as long as they are not bored, as long as you created emotion in them, may it be that they love it or that they hate it, it's a success. So yeah.
I was really happy about that Dragon Cancer game when it came out because it was like finally a game about parents losing a kid. Yes, but I actually didn't like the game, right? But I love that it exists. I love that it exists and that there's other opinions that exist in games and other stories and other people's stories and there's that creates reference points for us, right? And so I think part of us growing up as a medium is also acknowledging that we make stuff that we're proud of that not everyone likes and we don't have to sell it to everyone, right? So I think this is yeah.
And
To conclude, I
yeah.
would like to.
It's the end.
Yeah, it's unfortunately the end. I thought also like this is we're going too fast. There's so much to talk. But to conclude, going forward, what is the thing you hope for in this regard, and what you fear? Just in 2 sentences.
I can't wait to be next week or in 10 days because there will be Death Stranding from Kojima that will go out. And it could be, I don't know yet, but it could be the first big games who handle something like Solitude or something like that. So I'm very curious to see how people will react. We saw already the review that are very like 10 or 1. So it's interesting. This could be the first big AAA game with a good subject. So we'll see like how
Inside or what?
Death Stranding, the next game from
Death Stranding.
Kojima. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen.
And Sabine, you, what do you hope and what do you fear is going to
I
happen?
hope that both players and designers can get to a place where they can allow their genuine feelings to translate into what they're doing. Which means that that players also become critical of games that use cheap solutions to trick them into something. It's like actually if I'm a gamer or a player, I actually want to be taken seriously by my medium. And the same for designers. And I fear that we can already see that in this question, can games make you cry? That there's like a monetization of emotions.
Benjamin?
I hope that the diversity I see or that I discover in the indie in this industry of games really goes on growing and gets more of the AAA market because when I think about or when I walk through these halls, so many different ideas, so many ideological people working on their particular story and idea and emotion. When this goes on growing, I think we're on a good way.
Yeah, I hope the same that like AAA games like include emotions more and more, like we saw with God of War or Last of Us now. It's going really great, and I fear that like the more indie games and like the more emotional heavy games, that we can't figure out a way to be also commercial enough for the games industry as it is right now to make enough income, and that it's maybe dying out if we don't find a way like to include it in the games industry as it is now. At the end of the day, we need to make enough money, and not everybody is making. We are like glad that we going well, but still, like I know so many other games that game companies that are dying because they can't survive with heavy emotional topics.
Wow, this is a concluding remark. Yeah, no, I appreciate your honesty, but we have to close now. We have so much to talk about, I think, but we can't do it all here. And I appreciate that you all came. I think you have, I hope you have gained a lot, also emotions, but not only. And I appreciate it that you came all here and your insights. And I hope that your hopes come true and not your fears.